Hello and welcome to the lecture on selling and distribution. This lecture will be a little bit shorter than the others, but no less important. So this topics of selling, selling is how you actually get an order, how you interact with a customer and get them to say, yes, I want your product and give you money. Distribution is how you get your products from the factory to the customer. So we'll talk about both of those. When I first started in business, when I was a teenager, I always thought of selling as kind of like a cheesy used car salesman, somebody that's slick and maybe cuts corners and tries tricks to get people to buy their product. And it didn't seem a very honorable way to make a living in my naive eyes back then. As I worked my way up through companies and eventually as I owned my own company, I found that it was a vital thing and it was actually a lot of fun, and it's something, probably the thing I enjoyed the most about the time when I owned my own company. So I'll talk a little bit about that as we go through here. So first, distribution strategy, how products get from a factory to a customer. So that first category then is consumer goods, things that you and I might buy in a store. It can go in some cases directly from the producer to the consumer. If I want to buy a Ford truck, I can go to a Ford dealer and buy that truck, and I'm not dealing with anybody outside of Ford Motor Company. So that's that top line. It could go from a producer to a retailer. In that case, I would buy my Ford truck from some some other kind of company, okay, some other kind of car lot that isn't a Ford car lot. It could go through a wholesaler, that's somebody that buys products and then turns around and sells them to retailers. We'll talk about that more in a minute. Or it could be a very complicated chain, producer to agent broker to wholesaler to retail to consumer. The bad part about those kinds of chains where there's a lot of people in them is each one of those steps needs to make money. They mark the product up and take their cut, and so the product ends up getting more and more expensive before it actually gets to the consumer. The center section is very similar, but it deals with business goods, so goods that businesses sell to one another. Think of copy machines, computers, office furniture, things like that. Services like medical insurance for your employees, things like that. And you can see those also follow similar kinds of patterns, and then these also apply to services as well. So wholesalers, the kind of, we sometimes people call them middlemen. So one question to ask is, why are they necessary? Of course, they raise prices and take a cut of their own. So they're only going to exist if they provide some kind of benefit, either to customers or to manufacturers. So if you think about your local Ace Hardware store, they will, in all likelihood, purchase from wholesalers that purchase from manufacturers. They might not buy directly from Black & Decker, they buy from some warehouse kind of an arrangement. So one of the benefits to the retailer is that you get the benefit of bulk buying. So the wholesaler is going to buy a whole truckload full of screwdrivers. You don't have to buy a whole truckload full of screwdrivers for your little Ace Hardware store. So they'll buy in large quantities, get lower prices than you might get if you went directly to the factory. And they also provide storage, so they can warehouse all of those screwdrivers and send you a box or two each week rather than getting them all at once. They can break down large orders like that and parcel things out. And they can also give you combinations of goods. So that one wholesaler might be able to provide you with screwdrivers, wrenches, and hammers for your store. So you've kind of got one-stop shopping for all hand tools that you need. So among wholesalers, there are wholesalers that manufacturers own. That could be a sales branch where they just have salespeople working out of an office. And they have inventory there, or it could be a sales office where there's no inventory. Most of it is done through independent companies. So there could be merchant wholesalers, drop shippers, agents and brokers. I used to deal with manufacturer representatives a lot. So those are people that, as the name implies, they represent a manufacturer and they provide that manufacturer's products to retailers. They might have some inventory that they store so they can respond quickly to needs, those sorts of things. In terms of retailing, so then retailing is actually selling products to the intended direct user, end user rather. So these are examples. Of course, we all know brick and mortar retailers like stores at the mall or Batteries Plus or Ace Hardware, as I just mentioned. Those are all brick and mortar retailers, physical locations. So here's an example of non-store retailers. So starting the upper left, direct response retailing. That's you see an ad in a magazine, you see an ad on your Instagram feed or your Facebook feed, and you buy the product directly. Order now, click on it, get it. Internet retailing is web-based sellers, so those are companies that exist solely to sell on the internet. Amazon is a good example of that. In the blue section, automatic merchandising, that's bigger in some countries than it is here, but it's primarily vending machines. So it's, I've seen them in airports where you can buy an iPad or a phone or all kinds of expensive things beyond small purchases. So that's one way of doing it. And then the last, direct selling, that's where a lot of times they'll use the term multi-level marketing. That's where people invite their friends to their home, and then they have products that the friends can buy if they want. Tupperware, food storage containers was big back in the day. Now Scentsy Pot, those things where you can take tabs of wax and make your house smell nice, and a little burner thing. Those are sold exclusively through home parties like that. So personal selling is person-to-person promotional presentation to a potential buyer. I used to do an awful lot of that when I owned my company for bigger kinds of jobs, where I would come in and give a presentation, and often there would be competitors that would give presentations, and then a group of buyers would make a choice. So businesses spend a lot of money on that. So they spend a lot of money on advertising. You can see that they spend 5 to 10 times more on personal selling. What do they do when they spend on personal selling? That means they're paying salespeople a salary plus commission. They're paying their travel expenses. They're paying for samples for the salesperson to use, all kinds of different things, and that can be quite expensive. That doesn't work in all businesses. Personal selling, so a salesperson going to meet a customer and talk to them, generally requires that you have fewer customers that are geographically concentrated so that the salesperson doesn't spend all of their time driving. You can imagine if your territory was Idaho, Oregon, and Washington, you could spend 8 hours just getting to a customer. So it's better if the customers are more concentrated. Better if it's a technically complex product that requires some explanation or demonstration. A relatively high price is important because you need to gain enough from the sale to compensate the salesperson fairly. And then direct distribution channels, being able to get the product directly to the customer without going through middlemen. The one big advantage of personal selling, I would say, is also the information that you get back from customers. I found that talking to salespeople after they had made presentations, after they had interacted with customers, was a really valuable source of intelligence for my company. It would tell me what wasn't working, what customers didn't like, as well as what they really liked. And I was usually surprised by the answers that I got. So different types of personal selling. There's field selling, which is what I did. I would fly to different parts of the country and meet with park directors or school principals or PTA committees, that sort of thing. So I'm out in the field doing that kind of selling. There's also over-the-counter selling, which is like if you walked into many retail stores, maybe an auto parts store is a good example, an Apple store is a good example where there are people there that can explain things to you. And then of course there's telemarketing, which is less of a thing now than it used to be, but calling people up at home and trying to sell them something. The tasks that salespeople engage in, one is order processing. That's just the whole conveying technical information about the product and making sure that you capture what the customer wants correctly and convey that back to your factory so you make the right thing and deliver it at the right time. There is creative selling. That's a really interesting way to kind of look at each customer and understand how best to approach them. Kind of one size does not fit all, so you have to take a different approach with different types of customers. And then missionary selling, that's definitely the category that I fell in, where I believed very strongly about the benefits of my product, both to children and to purchasers. And so, trying to convince people that what I thought was important should be what they think is important too. That's kind of the missionary nature of it. So the steps in the selling process, the first step there at the bottom is prospecting qualifying. So identifying worthwhile potential customers, right? You don't want to waste your time talking to people that don't have enough money to buy your product or really aren't a good fit for your product, that sort of thing. You don't want to drive to go see somebody that is not likely to buy your product anyways. So that's something that, so the screening process is important. The second step is preparing for the sales interview. That's doing some research about your customer. What's important to them? What kind of track record have they had with your type of product in the past? Have they traditionally bought from one of your competitors? Have they bought from you before? Have they had problems? Are there things that you can do to solve those problems for them? So it's kind of getting to know as much about the customer as possible. I would read a customer's web page. I would look some of the key people up on LinkedIn and find out what their background was. And all of that is an effort to go to step 3 and fine tune your presentation. So talk about your product in a way that's meaningful and kind of hits the mark for that customer. I knew that with some types of customers, I could step really hard on the green message. I could really accentuate that, and it would be very meaningful for them. They would really appreciate that. As an example, landscape architects in San Francisco, they really liked hearing the green message, and I would make sure that was a strong component of how I presented to them. Park maintenance people in Georgia, not so much. So I would kind of have to tweak my presentation based on who it was I was talking to. Demonstrating the product, step 4, if you can involve the customer. I used to always bring samples and put them in the customer's hands while I was talking so that they could, a lot of times somebody can feel quality and take that information in and have that perception of quality cemented in their mind through touch more than they can through what I would tell them. Handling questions. The important thing there is to anticipate the questions. If you know that the customer is likely to raise 2 or 3 objections, then address those up front in your sales presentation. And that kind of heads it off at the pass. That's better than waiting till they ask a question and then asking and appearing defensive. Number 6 is probably the hardest step for a lot of people, and that's actually asking for the order. So once you've dealt with all their objections, you've demonstrated the product, you've fine-tuned your presentation to that customer, then it's actually saying, okay, we have an opening in our factory in 4 weeks. Can I schedule your order to ship then? That sort of thing. And then number 7, there's a step that a lot of people don't do that is so important, which is following up with the customer after they've bought the product. So it's an easy thing to do, but a lot of salespeople make the sale and move on and try to find the next customer. One of the things I used to do as a company owner is any order that we got over $25,000, I would call the customer directly and thank them for their business. And I can't tell you how many people were pleasantly surprised that somebody would take the time to actually call them and thank them for their business. It struck them as something positive but unusual. During that conversation, I would usually ask customers, what made you pick us? And the information I got from customers was invaluable. So a little bit about finding customers. One of the things that I found worked very, very well is Google AdWords. And this easily could have fallen under the marketing lecture we talked about a few weeks ago. But Google AdWords allows your company's links to appear at the top of a Google query. So if I'm looking for, I'll use an example from the last lecture, if I'm looking for a battery-powered weed eater, I Google that. The first several things that pop up are sponsored links, and then you get organic links below that. And so those sponsored links are companies that have paid money to say, I want to be at the top anytime somebody enters battery-powered weed eater. I want to come up first. And you could so companies can bid on that, and they can say, I'm willing to pay so much per click anytime somebody clicks on or enters this particular criteria and then clicks on my link. So you're only paying for people that are looking for your product and select your link. So you're not paying for impressions, you're paying for actual visitors to your website. So it's a nice direct way to pay for advertising. You can put a limit on it. You can see here I had a campaign where one of the items was $30 a day. Once it got to $30 a day, it stopped. So I didn't run up a ridiculous bill. So when I did the outdoor fitness company, you can see here I had a lot of different keywords that I wanted to come up if somebody entered them, and you could see I had different levels that I would set for those, how much I'd be willing to pay if somebody was searching for something. And again, it was a good way to get customers interested in our product and find them to be able to make sales. The last thing I want to mention is a really, really great book. It's an easy read. You can easily read it in a day. It's written by two brothers that are from Seattle. It's called Made to Stick, and it's about how to convey information to other people in a way that they remember it. So a lot of times when you make a sales presentation or make a pitch to somebody, they're not going to get out their checkbook or their credit card and buy it right that moment. They're going to think about it. And so you want to tell them something in a way that they remember days or weeks or months later when they actually make the purchase decision. So the key to this, and this is important for anybody that wants to tell people things that will stick with them, that they'll remember. So it's important for managers, for teachers, for ministers, for parents. All kinds of people can benefit from this approach. And they boil it down to making your message simple. If you have a very complex message with lots of moving parts, that's a lot harder for people to remember. So boil it down to what means something to that person. Having some unexpected aspect to it. So telling them or showing them something that they didn't anticipate is another way to make it sink in. Expressing something in concrete terms. So that's a way for them to visualize something that might be more esoteric. Okay. Credibility. You have to tell a customer why they should trust you. You have to tell them why they should listen to you, why you have something to say about a particular product that means something. Anytime you can have emotion as part of your pitch, that's important too. And then the final one I think is the most important, which is stories. If you can package your message in a story, people will remember that much more than they'll remember 8 bullet points. So that's a really effective method. So that's the end of the lecture. Again, I highly recommend that book, and I look forward to talking to you at the next lecture. Thank you.